When I first bought the land on the outskirts of town, I had big dreams. I wanted to build a quiet getaway, a place to relax, away from the city noise. It wasn't much to look at when I first got it, just an open plot with a few wildflowers and a broken fence. But to me, it was a slice of freedom. Little did I know, the Homeowners Association, HOA, would soon turn that dream into a nightmare. I wasn't part of their community, but my land bordered the HOA's residential area. At first, they left me alone, treating me like I didn't exist. But things changed when their new president, Sharon, took over. She was the type who thrived on control, with a fake smile plastered on her face while she issued fines for everything from unapproved garden gnomes to unsightly mailboxes. I first noticed something strange when a few workers started surveying near my fence line. Curious, I approached them, but they refused to answer my questions. I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were fixing a road. That was until one weekend I drove out to my land and nearly slammed on my brakes. A petrol pump. Right there, on my property. 4 bright red pumps stood tall, with a small canopy overhead. Workers were still around, hammering signs into the ground. I stared in disbelief. They hadn't just encroached. They had built a full-on business on my private land without asking. Fuming, I stormed over to Sharon's office. Her assistant barely looked up before telling me, "She's in a meeting." But I wasn't leaving. I pushed open the door, catching her mid-sip of her overpriced latte. "Care to explain why there's a petrol pump on my land?" I demanded, my voice cold and steady. Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, that? We assumed it was unused. It's for the community's benefit." "Benefit? You built it without permission. On my land," I snapped. "You're not technically part of the HOA," she said smoothly, like that excused breaking every law in the book. "It's an empty plot. We figured you wouldn't mind contributing to the community." I clenched my fists, biting back the rage crawling up my throat. She had no idea who she was messing with, because unlike her, I wasn't just a quiet landowner. I was the county inspector for property development. And if they thought they could pull this over on me, they had another thing coming. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I spent the next few days digging through every legal document related to my land. Property lines, permits, anything that could prove the HOA had crossed a line. What I found? They hadn't just crossed the line, they bulldozed over it. The petrol pump wasn't just an eyesore on my property. It was illegal on every level. No zoning approval, no environmental impact report, no safety inspections. Sharon and her little HOA empire had cut corners, assuming no one would catch them. Too bad for them. I wasn't just anyone. The following Monday, I walked into my office at the county inspector's department. My colleagues knew me as quiet and thorough, but that day, I had fire in my veins. I pulled every violation they had committed and compiled a report so airtight, not even Sharon's fake charm could slip through. Before I moved forward, I decided to give her one last chance. I called the HOA office. "This is Sharon," she answered, her voice all sugar and poison. "It's me," I said. "I'm giving you 24 hours to remove every single thing you built on my land. Or else—" She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Or else what?" "Sue us? That'll take months, sweetheart. By then we'll have made a nice profit." I hung up without another word. If she thought the legal system was slow, she had no idea what a county inspector could do. That afternoon, I sent my official complaint to the Zoning Commission and the Environmental Protection Bureau. Normally, cases like this took weeks, but when the words "illegal petrol pump" and public safety hazard hit the system, things moved fast. By sunset, the wheels of justice were already turning. 2 days later, I stood at the edge of my property when the inspection team arrived, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp. I didn't even bother hiding my smirk when Sharon pulled up in her sleek black SUV. Her smile faltered when she saw the inspectors. "What's this?" she demanded. I folded my arms. "You built illegally on my land. Now the county's involved." "You're bluffing," she hissed, but her voice wasn't as confident. One of the inspectors walked up to her. "Ma'am, we've found multiple violations. Failure to obtain proper zoning permits, lack of environmental clearance. This petrol pump is a major safety risk." "But you'll be fined," he continued. "And if the structure isn't removed within 14 days, the county will demolish it at your expense." Her face turned pale. You can't be serious." I leaned in just enough for her to hear me clearly. "I told you this wasn't over." As the inspectors marked violations and took photographs, I knew the real fun had just begun, because this wasn't just about getting my land back. This was about ruining the HOA's reign of terror, and I was only getting started. The next morning, I was sipping my coffee when my phone buzzed. A county-wide notice had been sent out. The HOA's illegal petrol pump wasn't just flagged for demolition. It was also under investigation for environmental contamination. Turns out, their underground tanks had been installed so poorly that there was a risk of fuel leaking into the soil. If proven, the fines would bankrupt the HOA. I smiled to myself. They had no idea how deep they were sinking. Later that day, I drove past the petrol pump. Sharon was there, pacing on her phone, probably begging some poor lawyer to fix her mess. I rolled down my window. "Tick-tock, Sharon. 14 days left." Her face flushed with rage. "You think you've won? You're messing with the wrong people." I laughed softly. "No, Sharon. You messed with the wrong person." I had spent years being quiet, playing by the rules, while the HOA bullied homeowners. But this time, I was done being nice. I was going to dismantle their little kingdom brick by brick. That night, I went deeper. I pulled public records on every property under the HOA's control. And what I found? Well, Sharon's illegal petrol pump was just the tip of the iceberg. They had approved unpermitted renovations, misused HOA fees, and, my personal favorite, violated accessibility laws by refusing to accommodate disabled residents. The best part? As a county inspector, I didn't need to wait. I filed every violation I found with the appropriate departments. Within hours, the HOA was hit with multiple formal inquiries. By the end of the week, chaos had erupted. The county posted a cease and desist notice on the petrol pump, freezing all operations. Sharon's phone calls to county officials. Useless. I had made sure everything was by the book. One morning, as I was leaving for work, a fancy legal envelope appeared in my mailbox, an attempt by the HOA to intimidate me with a lawsuit. But there was one problem for them. I knew the law better than their overpriced lawyer ever could. I walked into the HOA office later that day, the lawsuit in my hand. Sharon was sitting behind her oversized desk, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently. "You think this scares me?" I said, tossing the papers onto her desk. "You can't win," she snapped. "We have resources. You're just—" "A county inspector," I interrupted, smiling coldly. "Yeah, I am. And I've already filed 3 additional reports. By next week, the county will launch a full audit on your HOA's finances. You better hope your books are clean." Her face paled. She knew as well as I did. If there was even a hint of mismanagement, the county could dissolve the HOA altogether. "I told you to remove the petrol pump," I said softly. You didn't listen. Now, I'm going to burn your whole empire to the ground. I turned on my heel and walked out, feeling the weight of years of frustration lift off my shoulders. And this? It was only the beginning. Days passed, and the storm I had unleashed on the HOA only grew worse. The county's audit team moved swiftly, combing through the HOA's financial records. Meanwhile, inspectors revisited the petrol pump, and the environmental department confirmed the worst. Fuel leakage had already begun contaminating the soil. The fines, over $200,000, and every penny had to be paid by the HOA. I was in my kitchen one afternoon when I heard a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Greg, one of my quieter neighbors. He shifted nervously before speaking. I heard about the audit. Is it true? I nodded. They're buried, Greg, and once the county finishes, the HOA won't have a leg to stand on. His eyes widened in surprise and relief. Thank God. They fined me $500 last year because my grass was too tall. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. I smiled. Actually, there is. I needed witnesses, people who had been wronged by the HOA, and Greg wasn't the only one. Over the next week, I gathered testimonies from homeowners, a retired couple who were fined for planting flowers without permission, a single mom whose driveway was nearly towed because of a minor oil stain, and a war veteran who the HOA harassed for installing a wheelchair ramp. Every story painted a clear picture. The HOA had turned from a neighborhood protector into a power-hungry bully. And I was going to make sure everyone saw the truth. I compiled these statements and sent them to the local news. It didn't take long before a reporter called back, eager to dig deeper. Within days, a headline splashed across the evening news. Corrupt HOA faces investigation for illegal petrol pump and homeowner harassment. When I saw Sharon's face on TV, I couldn't help but smirk. She looked furious, trying to spin the story, claiming the HOA was being unfairly targeted. But no one was buying it, especially not the county commissioner. A week later, I was summoned to a hearing where the county would decide whether the HOA could continue operating. When I arrived, Sharon and the entire HOA board were already seated, looking pale and exhausted. The commissioner's voice boomed through the room. Our investigation confirms that the HOA has violated multiple zoning laws, mishandled homeowner funds, and ignored environmental regulations. Effective immediately, the petrol pump will be demolished at your expense. Furthermore, he paused, flipping through the evidence I had provided. We are recommending the dissolution of this HOA. Sharon shot up from her chair. You can't do this, she shrieked. This is our community. The commissioner raised a brow. Not anymore. I leaned back in my seat, satisfied. They thought they could push me around, treat me like I didn't matter. But now? I was the one calling the shots. And I wasn't done yet. The days following the hearing were nothing short of chaos, for the HOA at least. For me, it was sweet, well-earned peace. The county wasted no time enforcing their ruling. Within a week, heavy machinery rolled onto the land and began tearing down the illegal petrol pump. I stood on my porch, watching as the structure that had caused me so much grief crumbled into rubble. Sharon. She didn't show her face. Not once. Word spread fast through the neighborhood. Homeowners who had once been terrified of the HOA's authority were celebrating. The ridiculous fines stopped. The threats disappeared. It felt like a dark cloud had finally lifted. And then came the final blow. A few days after the demolition, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the county commissioner's office. My curiosity piqued. I tore it open, and nearly laughed out loud when I read the contents. The HOA was officially dissolved. No more endless fines, no more ridiculous rules, no more power-hungry board. The neighborhood was finally free. I wanted to savor the victory, but I wasn't quite finished. I had one last move to make, a move that would ensure no one like Sharon would ever take control again. I called Greg and a few other homeowners who had stood by me during the fight. Together, we formed a new community association, one built on fairness, transparency, and actual support for the residents. At our first meeting, I made a promise. No more petty fines, no more bullying. This neighborhood is ours, not some power-hungry board's, and we'll keep it that way. The applause that filled the room. It felt better than any revenge ever could. And as for Sharon, I heard she tried to join a new HOA across town, but her reputation followed her. No one wanted her on their board. Poetic justice, if you ask me. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, I watched the sun set over my peaceful, quiet land. No more HOA, no more stress, just freedom. And if anyone ever tried to take that from me again, they'd learn the hard way. I wasn't the kind of person you could push around. Life after the HOA's downfall was peaceful. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the constant weight of their petty fines and threats hanging over my head. My land was mine again, untouched, unrestricted, and fully protected. The new community association was everything the HOA had failed to be. We held meetings where everyone had a voice. Instead of fines, we focused on helping each other, whether it was organizing neighborhood cleanups or assisting elderly residents with home repairs. The change was refreshing, and for once, it felt like a real community. One day, I received a call from the county commissioner's office. At first, I thought it might be about some lingering paperwork from the HOA case, but instead, it was a job offer. "Your knowledge of land use regulations is impressive," the commissioner said. "And frankly, we could use someone who stands up for the little guy. Would you be interested in joining our inspection team permanently?" I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Becoming a permanent county inspector wasn't just a career shift. It was a statement. No HOA or shady board would ever pull the kind of stunt Sharon did on my watch. And if they tried, well, they'd find themselves facing someone who knew every inch of the law and how to use it. I still see Sharon from time to time. She never fully recovered from losing her power. Rumor has it, she tried to start another HOA nearby, but no one trusted her enough to let her run things. Without her influence, the neighborhood flourished, property values stabilized, and best of all, people were happy again. One evening, as I stood on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reflected on how far things had come. If the HOA had left me alone, I might have never found my calling. But by pushing me too far, they created their own downfall. I smiled to myself, knowing that my story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power and making sure no one else had to suffer under a corrupt system again. And as for anyone who thinks they can walk over me in the future, let them try. I'm always ready.